Hey guys, this video is going to go over the sequence properties FRQ. So we have three different parts to this one, and there's three different methods that we're going to be working on. Our first method here is called get diffs. Okay, this is for question one, and what it's doing is it's taking in a sequence, okay, and it's an array of integers, and what we're going to do with this get diffs method is we're going to return the difference between all consecutive terms. So the difference between the first and second, the second and third, the third and fourth, and so on. We're going to find all of the differences between those consecutive terms and then store those differences in an array that we're going to return. Okay, so since we're going to be returning an array for this method, we need to create the array that we're going to be returning. So it's going to be an array of integers. I'm just going to call it diffs. Okay, so let's see here. We need to give it a length. Now, let's say I have 5 numbers in my original sequence array. There's only 4 differences that I could find there. So the length of this new array that we're making is going to be 1 less than the original array, which is SEQ or sequence here in this case. So I'm just going to do sequence.length minus 1, and that would be the length of our new array, 1 less than the original. Now after that, all we have to do is we need to make an array, or I'm sorry, not an array, but a for loop. And let's see, we're going to have it run for the length, or up to the length of our new array, and we're going to increment by 1. Okay, so in this for loop, we need to think about what do we want to do. Remember, we're trying to find the differences here. So to find the differences, we're going to just subtract one term from the other. Okay, so we're going to store those values in this diffs array that we made. So the element I of diffs would be equal to our sequence, and we're going to do the bigger term first and then subtract the smaller term from it. Okay, so that would be the difference between 2 consecutive terms. Now our for loop runs, it stores all of those differences in that array, and then all we need to do at the end is we need to return our array. Okay, and the diffs array, remember, is storing the differences of that original sequence. So that's all for part 1. Okay, question 2 and question 3 deal with specific types of patterns. So question 2 wants us to come up with this is linear method. Now, if a sequence is linear, okay, some math here. If a sequence is linear, that means that the differences that we just found should all be the same, meaning that we go up by 2 each time, or we go up by 5 each time, or whatever. Okay, as long as those differences are constant and if they're all the same, that's how we determine that that original sequence is linear. So we need to return a Boolean here for this method. So what we need to do is we need to check to see, are all of those constants for that sequence the same as one another? Okay, now we're going to be using our get diffs here because we need to come up with the differences. So within this method, what we're going to do is we're going to make an array, and I'm going to call it diffs again, and we're going to set it equal to get diffs, which is the method we just made, of sequence. So that is going to call our method that we just made, the get diffs method. It's going to store all of those differences in this diffs array. So what we want to do now is we want to check to see, are all of the elements, all of these differences, the same as one another? So I think the easiest way to do that is compare all of the elements in the array to the first element in the array. So if I'm going to be comparing all of the ones in the array to the first one, I'm going to do a for loop that starts at 1 because I'm going to be comparing everything to the element 0. And we're still going to run this the same as we did our other one here. Diffs.length. It's going up by 1 each time. Now, if we are comparing to the original one, we need to think, since we're returning a Boolean here, is it going to be like how is it going to be easiest to return true and false here? For me, I thought it would be easier to return false once we found a pair that didn't match. And then if it goes through the entire for loop and it never triggers that conditional statement, that must mean that all of the elements are the same, and we would return true at the end here. So I made my if statement, if diffs at I does not equal diffs 0, then that must mean that the differences aren't the same, and we would return false. Now, if it runs through the entire for loop and that's never true, that must mean all of the elements are the same, meaning all of the differences are the same, which means that this sequence must be linear. So we're going to return true. So that's it for the isLinear method. Now, the isQuadratic method, which is for question 3 here, is very similar. Now, again, some math here. If a sequence is quadratic, that means that the second differences are the same, which means the differences of the differences are the same. Another way to think about it would be to think that if we have a sequence and we find the difference, okay, the differences between all of those consecutive terms, that new pattern, okay, that set of differences, because it should have common differences itself, that means that that new array that we're going to create should actually have a linear pattern. So there's a lot of different ways to think about it, but when we're approaching this, since we have an isLinear method, what we're going to do is we're going to call that method on this differences array, and if that set of differences, that array of differences, is linear, then that's what tells us that the original sequence is quadratic. So we're going to be doing something very similar to what we did in the isLinear method. Okay, again, we're returning a Boolean here, and we need to have this array of differences handy, so we need to start off by creating that same array. So this is exactly the same as what we did. I guess I could have just copied and pasted here. Okay, we are making an array of the differences of the original sequence. Now, what's going to be different is we don't have to do a for loop here because we already have the isLinear method, which is running through the for loop and it's checking all of those terms. So we can just use the isLinear method. We don't need to make a for loop here again. We do need to have a conditional statement to check and see if this differences array is linear. Okay. We also need to check and make sure that the original sequence is not linear. Okay. We know that it's quadratic if our original sequence is not linear and if the differences array is linear. So I'm going to have two conditions here. Okay. So first I'm going to check and make sure that my original sequence array is not linear. Okay. And I'm going to check and see if my differences array is linear. So if both of those conditions are met, then we're going to return true. That must mean that our original sequence is quadratic. Okay, if that's not true, then that just means that it's not quadratic. So we would return false. All right, guys, I hope this video was helpful. As always, reach out with questions. Don't hesitate to ask for help, and have a great day.